Hello. So I'm going to get my sourdough starter revived, I guess is the word for it, because that's what I can remember right now. So I'm going to feed it tonight, and then I'm going to put it in my proofer, which is down there, because I keep my house kind of cold because it's expensive to heat with oil. So I normally keep my house on about 64 degrees. So I found out when I started doing sourdough bread that wasn't really too conducive to make sourdough. It makes it hard for it to bubble up and activate. So I'm going to feed my sourdough starter. I always do that when I get home on Fridays. So I put 113 grams of my old starter and 113 grams of flour. This is whole wheat flour. And then I'm going to add 113 grams of water. And then I just mix all that together and put it in the proofer, and tomorrow morning it'll be all ready for me to use. So I will be right back with the water. So here's my water, and I use warm water. And I will just mix this in a few minutes. So I make 2 batches because I have really enough to make 3, but I only make 2. So I'm going to zero this out. I need 113 grams of starter again. So put the extra on the lid that I don't need right now. And then 113 grams of flour. And it's better to weigh everything out. It's more accurate. And then 113 grams of water. I will find a sourdough starter recipe and put that in the comment section so you can start your own sourdough starter. A friend of mine was gracious and gave me some of hers, so this sourdough starter is over 5 years old. So it's nice and sour, and it has a really, really good taste. You can use all-purpose flour. Every once in a while, instead of using whole wheat flour, I will use all-purpose flour. You can also use, but I don't do that all the time. Wheat feeds it really well and gets it really active if you need to do that. You can also use rye flour. I'm not a big fan of rye bread, so I've not done that, but if I'm not sure how much of a rye flavor it gives it. But if that is your thing, just play around with it and see. If you use it one time and you don't really like it, you can switch back to whole wheat. You can add all-purpose, whichever one that you want. So I'm getting this together. I've got brats on the grill, and I've got French fries in the air fryer. Steve and the boys will be here in a few minutes, and Steve and I are going to play at my high school. They're putting on Mamma Mia, so we're going to go see that tonight, and I'm super excited. So I'm just trying to throw this stuff together so it's ready to go in the morning. And I will continue this video in the morning when I actually make sourdough bread. It's a several-day process. You're not necessarily active for several days, but it has to rise for a while, and I will explain more of that later on. But you can see my sourdough bread here, and I've got sourdough bagels in this container. So it feeds my family. I know what's in it. If you don't plan on using it within a certain amount of time, I suggest freezing it because it will start to mold within about a week. So anyway, so this is going to be my sourdough starter. This you can put in your composter. I'm just throwing it away for today, or you can, a friend of mine said that I actually got this sourdough starter from. She says you can make crackers out of it. I've not done that at this point. You could use it to make another batch and gift it to a friend. So this is just going in my proofer down here. This keeps it, I have it set on 75 degrees. It folds down when I don't use it. They can be kind of pricey, but I found mine on, I want to say eBay. So I didn't pay full price for it. I think it's about $200 full price. I did not even probably pay half of that. I can't remember exactly how much, but I got a really good deal. And it has made my sourdough baking so much better because it's at a higher temperature than I keep my house. So I will be back tomorrow. You have a good evening. Okay, so I've already made my dough for my sourdough bread. Now I'm going to work on my dough for sourdough bagels. So I'm going to try to do these in 3 separate videos. So last night we fed our sourdough starter. So if you remember from yesterday, it was nothing like this. It is all bubbly and it has risen. So it's doing its thing, which is what we want. It's being active. So I'm going to take that and use that. So here's one that I have already opened, and I'm going to use it. So I need 200 grams of starter. So this one is double what I need for my sourdough bread. So this will pretty much wipe me out because I've already used 100 grams on the sourdough bread, and I need 200 grams for the sourdough bagels. So that's why I make 2 of these. That way I can use a little bit out of this other one for the pretzels, and I can feed it when I'm finished, and then I'll have starter to work on for next weekend. So if you see, there's very, very little left in here. So I'm just going to move it over there because I will use a little bit of it for to mix with the other starter. So I have 200 grams of starter. I need 315 grams of cold water. So if you watch me make the sourdough bread, I needed warm water. This one calls for cold water. I'm not exactly sure. So, but I don't question it, I go with it. So 315 grams of cold water. So I need to get up to 515 on my scale. There we go. If you're over by 1 or 2, this is 516. That's not going to make that big of a deal. And I'm going to add 30 grams of maple syrup. I'm assuming it just feeds the yeast. So I'm going to take this back out. Now this is saying perfectly 515, so we're good with that. We need 30 grams, so I need up to 545. Who says you don't use math? Okay, and again, this is saying, well, now it went back down to 545. It was saying 546. So I'm going to take and mix this, again, to dissolve it. If you saw the sourdough bread, I did the same thing. So the starter dissolves into the water, and the maple syrup in this case as well. So it all gets mixed together. Now I'm going to put this on my scale, I'm going to clear it, and you can put your whisk or whatever you're using in your water bowl, it doesn't matter. And for the bagels, I use all-purpose flour, and I need 750 grams, so it's a lot. But there's something, and I should research it, I briefly read something about all-purpose flour and absorbing water compared to bread flour, so there's a reason why there's 750 grams in here instead of when I use bread flour for the pretzels and the bread, I only use 500 grams. So I'm up to 676, so I'm pretty close. And there we go. I just scrape a little bit off the top if I go a little bit over. But again, if it's just a little, it's not a big deal. And I need 10 grams of salt. So I'm going to move my scale out of the way. And I'm going to move a lot of things out of the way because I'm going to have to put this on the island and knead it. But first I'll whisk as much as I can with the whisk, or whatever you call this thing, that it's like a Danish hook whisk or Danish hook or Danish whisk, I think is what it's called. Like I said in the sourdough bread video, I had seen people use these and I had heard that they work really well. So I wanted to give it a shot. I used to use my KitchenAid mixer for this, and it sounded like it was straining the motor really bad, and I was reading the reviews on the recipe, and a lot of people were having issues with their motor burning out with this recipe, so I don't need that. So I do it the old-fashioned way. So I have one of my stools that I bought for my island, and I knead it in the bowl a little bit, and then eventually I will put it on the counter and finish kneading it there. It's not very time intensive as far as you actively working with the bread or the dough for the bagels or whatever. It has to sit and rise for hours. That's the longest part. So this is the schedule that works best for me. Friday night or Friday afternoon after work, I come home, I feed my starter, I put it in my proofer. Then it sits overnight. Then the next morning I get up and I make the dough for the bread, the bagels, and I've added pretzels to that as well. I made pretzels one snow day, and Christian, my youngest son, was like, ooh, those smell so good. So he tried one, and one turned into 4. So, and if I find something that my boys like, because they're such picky eaters, I try to continue to make it. So it was gone in like a day and a half between him and Steve. So last weekend was the second time I made the pretzels. I said, just so you know, I'm only making these on the weekend. So once they're gone, they're gone. So that's because I don't have time during the week to make all this. So, and I figured kneading this by hand is kind of a workout at the same time. So it's coming together. I'm probably gonna pour it here, and then I take the extra flour and stuff that hasn't incorporated yet, and I put it out here with my dough, and I will end up with it all incorporated when it's all said and done. So that's why I like getting on top of the stool. It gives me more leverage. So you just keep going like this until it's all incorporated. I think the recipe, I don't know if it gives a time. I don't think I've ever timed it. So I just kind of roll it around to get all the pieces to eventually attach. And then you just keep kneading, folding over, pushing down until you can tell it's like one cohesive thing. Everything's not just like clumpy like it is now. So, and this makes 8 bagels. I normally get an Asiago cheese mixture from Walmart that's already shredded, and or it's not really shredded, it's just cut up, I guess. And I put those on top, and Steve absolutely loves these. I don't really eat them. I have, and they are good. I'll eat a half of one because I'm still doing Weight Watchers. I've lost 18.2 pounds so far. Still not where I want to be, but I'm closer than I was back in January. I think by June I'll be where I want to be. But, so there are a lot of points. So I would rather spend my points on something else than a bagel. But I do eat the sourdough bread for breakfast. It's part of my breakfast every morning. So anyway, so you can see pretty much all the pieces are now attached to my dough. So I just sit here and just keep kneading and knead. And this will not fit in the proofer. I can't fit all 3 things, and I wasn't going to buy another one. So what I do for this is I have a keep warm setting on my oven. So before I start working on the dough, I turn it on for a minute or 2, and then I turn it off. So it's not too warm when the dough goes in, because you don't want it to start cooking, because that would not be good. But it's enough to be warm enough for what it needs to do today. So once I finish kneading this, I will put it back in the bowl. I will cover it with a towel, and then I will put it in the oven and let it rest for 20 minutes. The oven is not on, it is off. Remember, I only left it on for a minute or 2 just to warm up a little bit, because it gets cold in the winter in New England, and I don't keep my house super warm because it's expensive to heat up here. So, and I stay pretty busy, so I stay pretty warm. So this will rest for 20 minutes, and then I will pull it out and make balls, and then let it rest for another 15, and then I will pull it out and let it make the actual bagel shape, and then it will rest for like 2.5 to 4.5 hours. Then I put it in the fridge for 12 to 24. So tomorrow morning I will get up and bake them. Well, you have to boil them, and then I'll bake them in the oven. So this is almost ready to go. It's all together. I will also attach the recipe that I use, the website, in the description, so you can see the recipe for yourself, and you can come up with a timetable that works for you. So I'm just gonna make it into like a ball like this, put it back into my bowl. Then I'm gonna take a tea towel, or a flour sack towel, I think they call it, because this is the biggest one that I have that will fit there. So I will wet it just so it's damp. Sorry, I know I'm out of your line of sight. And cover it. And let it rest for 20 minutes. So while it's resting, I'm going to work on my pretzels. And then I'm going to go back and take care of the other two things that I've already made. So join us. I will be back. Okay, so now I'm going to continue working on my bagels. So my dough has been resting for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to take it out and I'm going to shape it into balls. So a little bit of flour that was on the bowl, but that's okay. So I'm going to shape it into 8 balls. So I'm going to cut my dough in half. Then I try to make a ball out of that. It just makes it easier to form them later. So now I have 2. So I'm going to take each of these and cut those in half. And then again, I'm going to try to form those into balls. I don't know, I've just found this is easier for me because otherwise they kind of like get a hole on the bottom or something from where you've cut and it doesn't want to form together very well. So, and it makes it easier to try to make them even. So now I have 4. So if I take each 4 and cut it into half, I'm going to have 8. You can also make 10 with this recipe. I've not done 10. You would need 2 baking sheets for 10. Steve can eat a lot. Even though he does the fasting now, he fasts for a day and only eats dinner. And then that's one day, and then the next day he eats like normal. And eats normal for Steve. So, I mean, the bigger ones are better in my opinion. So I'm just going to take these. They don't have to be perfect. I kind of like the fact that they're not perfect. Our perfect food scares me because it's far from perfect. And that's why I like making all this stuff. I know what goes in it. I know what I'm eating. I know what my family is eating. It's cheaper, way healthier. So next weekend, I was going to make it this weekend, but I decided to do the video. Steve is wanting egg bagels. So he was like, can you do that with sourdough bread? Or with sourdough? I said, I don't know, but I'll find out. So I did find a recipe. There's a lady that I get eggs from around here. And so I actually got duck eggs to make for that. So that's going to be next weekend. If it turns out really well, I might do a video of that because I'll probably be making it that way from here on out if it turns out really well. So all I'm doing is forming these in the balls, putting them on my sheet pan. I've lined it with parchment paper, and then when we actually shape the bagels, I'll put semolina flour on here so they don't stick. Once I shape these in the balls, I'm going to put them back in the oven that I had kind of warmed a little bit earlier and let them rest for another 15 minutes. And I will come back and shape them into actual bagels instead of just balls. So here's the 8. I'm going to cover them again with my dampened towel, and back in the oven they go to just keep warm. Okay, so now that they've rested for another 15 minutes, I'm going to take and shape them into bagels. So I just take the ball and I insert or make a hole in the center, and then I just take and spin it. You can do it on your counter. You're just forming the hole. Again, these aren't going to look 100% perfect because we don't have fancy little machines, but that's okay with me. So there's one. I'm going to put a little semolina flour down. I use this when I make noodles. I haven't made noodles in a while. With the Weight Watchers, it makes it a little hard. So I'm going to go through and do these with each one. When I'm finished, I'm going to put them back in the oven. Again, the oven is not on, and so they can rise anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 hours. You know they're ready when you can test it to make sure that they're ready, because I've made the mistake of not doing this because I didn't know it was a thing. You put cold water in a bowl, and then if you can put it in the bowl and it floats, then they're ready. So then what I mean by ready is they're ready to go in the refrigerator, and that's where they'll sit for 12 to 24 hours. Again, my time frame, the way that I do this and why I have found that works for me. Again, I feed my sourdough starter Friday evening, it sits in the proofer. Saturday morning, I get up and do all this. And then tomorrow morning, so by this afternoon, these will be ready to go in the fridge. And then tomorrow morning, I'll get up and create my boiling water for these to go into for, I'll have to double check. I want to say it's 30 seconds for each side. So they go in, and then they go back on my tray, and I put cheese on mine. You can put whatever toppings you want, everything bagel seasoning. You can put cheese, you can keep them plain. I made 2 plain last week. Sesame seeds, whatever you want to put on yours, you can put. And then you bake them, and then that's it. So I'm just going to go through and finish these. I think I'll turn my oven on for like another maybe minute, just on the keep warm setting. So my oven is a little bit warmer because it makes the 2.5 hour to 4.5 hour time frame a little faster. It still will take at least a minimum of 2.5 hours, but I have had to keep them in there longer if it's not really warm. So it can go longer than 4.5 hours if need be. The end result is you need it to float when you put it into a bowl of cold water. So otherwise they're real tough and chewy. So I have them all formed and made. Again, this will go back in my oven, so I don't have to touch these anymore today, other than making sure that they float and putting them in, covering them and putting them in the fridge. And that's all I have to do with these today. And I will be back tomorrow or later today to show you what they look like when they're ready to go in the fridge. And then, of course, tomorrow I'll come back and show you what it looks like to boil them and bake them and all that fun stuff. So we will be back. Okay, so I'm going to check to see if the bagels are ready to be put in the refrigerator. So they've gotten plump. You can see they're much bigger and fluffier than when I first put them in there. You see there's not much of a hole. So I have just a small bowl of cold water. I'm just going to dip it in there. It floats, so I'm good to go. So I'm going to take it out, dry it off with my paper towel, put it back on the parchment paper. I'm going to take this off because I don't need this anymore, and I'm going to wrap it in some aluminum foil and put it in the fridge. And then tomorrow morning when I wake up and start making breakfast, I can throw this in. Well, first I have to boil some water with baking soda and brown sugar, and then I think it's about 30 minutes on each side, and then they'll bake in the oven. So I will come back tomorrow and let you witness all of that. Okay, so my oven just beeped saying that it was ready. It's at 550. Now the one thing that I've done a time or two is I forgot to turn the temperature back down. So I just kind of had to adjust the times a little bit mentally, so especially if I have a lot on my mind. So the parchment paper, parchment paper I just grabbed like this, And I just set in my Dutch oven. And I kind of straighten it out a little. Then I put the lid back on. I'm going to go ahead and drop the temperature so I don't forget. I drop it preheated to 550. And then I drop the temperature to 450. Which obviously is already heated to 450. And then I'm going to put this in there and bake it for 30 minutes. And then I'm going to start on my bagels. It gets a tablespoon of baking soda and a tablespoon of brown sugar. And I will be back on another video showing all of that. Okay, so I have my sourdough bread in the oven. So now I start working on my bagels. The sourdough bread will be cooking for about 28 minutes now. So I have my water on to start boiling. So I can boil my bagels for 15 to 20 seconds per side. There's a tablespoon of baking soda and a tablespoon of brown sugar in my water. It should be coming up to a boil soon. Steve likes Asiago cheese on here. So I'm going to bake with Asiago cheese that I'll put on once I've boiled all my bagels. So this has been sitting in the refrigerator since yesterday, probably around 2:30. So we'll say 2:30. So it has been sitting in there for about 17 hours. So it can 12 to 24, or they may even have 12 to 48, I can't remember. So we put the semolina flour down, which helps the bagels not to stick to the parchment paper. But I'm just moving them a little to make them easier to get into the boiling water. You can only put a couple at a time because you'll bring the temperature of your water down. So we're getting some nice bubbles now. So I'm going to start adding my bagels. And this is why they have to pass the float test. That, and they will be super dense. Ask me how I know. And I'm quiet because I'm mentally counting in my head again, 15 to 20 seconds. And then that's all I have to do on these. You can add everything bagel seasoning if you want. You could add cheese, Asiago cheese, Parmesan cheese. I've done, what do you call it? Pepper jack cheese, and that's okay. It seemed a little soft to me, so I think a harder cheese is better. On top, you could go plain, you could go sesame seeds. If you want to get crazy like Einstein Bagels does, and I love their bagels, and I don't have any of those around here. They used to have like an apple one, like an apple pie, apple crumb, apple crumble, I don't know, but it had like apples and this crumble mixture, and it was amazing. We used to go every so often when my boys were little. On the way to school, there was one near the school that they went to, and we would stop sometimes in the mornings, and they loved the little like pop ones. So the center of the bagels, they made with cinnamon sugar, and it come in a little cup, and they loved them. So sometimes I would, maybe once or twice a month on like a Friday or something, I would treat them to that. So kind of fun. That was a long time ago. But, so I'm going to finish boiling these. I'm going to put the cheese on top. I may leave a couple plain because Steve has been saying that he wanted some with peanut butter. And my in-laws are coming for brunch today. So I still have a couple of plain ones left from last time. But in case anybody wants a plain bagel today, they can have it. And I mean, you can do whatever combination you want to do, and that's the nice thing about making stuff at home. You get to choose what you want to do. For instance, when the boys were little, and I still make homemade pizza now, but they eat a whole lot more. I used to make like thirds. I would make a third that Alex liked, a third that Christian liked, and a third that I liked. So I mean, I'm sure pizza joints will let you do that with them, but I feel bad ordering stuff like that. So you can make whatever you want to make. Make it as many or as little. So I like the versatility of all of this. And I like knowing what's in my food, because what they allowed in food here in America compared to other countries is disgusting. And I learned a lot. My oldest son is on the spectrum. They don't classify it as Asperger's anymore. But I learned a lot about dyes and high fructose corn syrup and all of that stuff when he was diagnosed, and I started researching. I had about 2 weeks of a pity party. And then I was like, okay, Cheryl, you can sit here and what if all day, or you can figure out what you need to do to help him. So then I became a woman on the mission, and we got him into therapy, and he's very high functioning, and I'm very blessed with that. And I've had many teachers through the years tell me if I hadn't have said anything, they never would have known. And that took a lot of work, a lot of work. But I will fight tooth and nail for my kids. So that's what I did. I set out and I said, he is going to have the most successful and normal life despite what's been handed to him. So here we are. So I started really back then making a lot of my own food once I learned what was in the food. Like his second, I think it was, no, was it? His 4th grade teacher, they were doing experiments on bread and looking at the mold and such, and she couldn't get the bread to mold because of all the preservatives they put in bread. So I was like, I have homemade bread at home. Do you want me to bring some in? And she said yes. So, I mean, it's crazy what they allow to go into food. And I understand it. I understand why. But it can't be good for us. These bagels will only last about a week. So if you're not going to eat this amount in a week, you can freeze them. And then you can thaw them out. They suggest not in a microwave. Just let it thaw out on the counter. And then maybe like bake it in the oven for a little bit. So these will sit here until my sourdough bread is currently cooking at 450 or baking at 450. And once that finishes, I don't know why I put this on, it's not hot. But once the sourdough finishes baking at 450, I turn it down and take the lid off, and it bakes at 400 for 10 to 15 minutes. So once I turn the oven down to 400, that's when the bagels go in. And actually I'm supposed to preheat the oven to 450 for the bagels, then turn it down to 400 when they go in. So it works out perfect. So this is the routine I've established that works well for me. You do what works best for you. So I will be back when these come out of the oven. So I just pulled my sourdough bread out that's been baking at 450 for 30 minutes. So now I'm gonna put my bagels in, because you're supposed to preheat the oven to 450, turn it down to 400, and then bake the bagels for 18 to 22 minutes. So the sourdough bread will be done a little bit before then, and then a few minutes later the bagels will come out, and I will be back to show you what we end up with. Okay, so the bagels should be done at this point. So when I pull them out, this is what they look like. So they're going to cool on a baking, not a baking sheet, they're going to cool on a cooling rack, and then I will put them up in a little bit. I hope you like what you saw. Subscribe and save. Have a good day.